All right, thank you everybody, and we'll just recommence. So I'll just recap on this recommendation, and I just want to make one amendment to it. It's slightly important. It's the $10 including GST voucher, so it's actually $8.70. That's the real cost. But if we just go $10 including GST voucher, thank you. Just confirm that the second is okay with that. Yeah. All right. So it is around, councillors, it's really around whether we want to stimulate our business community. And what I mean by the business community, there has been sort of an assumption this is just a CBD thing. Certainly that is where a lot of our businesses are, but it's the garage in Ashurst, it's the butcher in Milsom, it's the cafe in Awapuni, and it is the shoe shop in the CBD. So it's whether we want to do this or not. My argument is it can be done within existing budgets. We've heard that, and that's why we've put the redemption date as is. So there does need to be some urgency with it. It's extremely low risk for us as a council. It can be, the vouchers can be numbered, they can be decounterfeited by certain ways of letterpress numbering, etc. But we'll let the staff work that out. They've seen or heard the comments from you on that. It does provide a much needed stimulus after the initial pent up spend. And just to one of the councillors' comments about that business seems to be going okay. Yes, it is, but it's brittle. It's really brittle. And really, this is the only thing that council will have done for SMEs and businesses outside our free car parking. And again, I think we've done a good job in not going over the top there. And I think we've sort of explored that before with the recovery plan. The Choose Manawatu, this gives the Choose Manawatu website some real stimulus itself and some legs. There hopefully will be others that will want to opt in. There may be some that want to opt out as well. But I would say that there has been no other rates or financial inclusion to our business community. Yes, they've been helped by the government with wage subsidies, but anybody that's been in business, and there is only a few of us that are at that table here, it's all about your fixed costs. It's all about your outgoings that continue regardless of wages. So look, I would like you to, this is a hand up motion, not a handout. So it's about a multiplier as well. If we get the full redemption, that's fantastic because it means we've probably got in excess of $1 million plus being spent within our local businesses. We've taken out the biggies and obviously the ones we don't want to support. And look, supermarkets have done extremely well, so I don't think they'll be arguing at us. They've done extremely well in this lockdown period. So look, I'll open it now for any other comments. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And first, well, again, thank you to the officers for bringing the report back, recognising that was a quick turnaround. And thank you, Mr Mayor, for bringing this forward from that councillor workshop. I'm going to actually seek your support, Mr Mayor, to include an additional, what are those called, caveat in there. And what I'd like us to add to that with your agreement, Mr Mayor, is that the voucher can be redeemed for face value against rates. If we can add that underneath there. So to comment broadly on the proposal in front of us, this has been the subject of discussion. For me, it's been the subject of discussion with our communities, I'm sure for many of you, and there's been some really mixed responses which have been informative and instructive, and as a result I've spent, like many of you did I'm sure, Saturday and a little bit of Sunday in town looking at the parking, and Councillor Barrett talked about the anecdotal evidence that's been flying around today. Actually at the moment all we have is anecdotal evidence really. So I'm not leaning on that too heavily, but it was certainly helpful in my thinking to note that the car parking was busy right in the central city, but the free car parks that we provide around the edge of the central city were empty. So I drew some conclusions from that, and I'm not going to bore you with those. But talking to retailers, as I did a few of them on Saturday particularly, they were telling me that people were coming back, but the business was slow and it was hard. And the graphs show that today, that business has come back up. It's just under where it would normally be, but that doesn't help. Being business as usual doesn't help the 6 weeks where they've not been able to trade. There is a massive hole in those gaps. We don't need business as usual. We need 20, 30% plus to help our small businesses stay in business. Without that, I do have concerns, and those were evidenced by some of the conversations I had over the weekend. So with that addition of using it to pay rate bills, one of the concerns that people were talking to me about was, what about people who can't afford to go out and spend $30 or $20? That was raised in questions as well. I think we have to be real. This is people's own money we're giving them back effectively. So if they can just put it off their rates bill, say, I don't need that $10, thank you, I'll just have it off my rates bill, I think that goes some way to addressing that issue. So people are nervous about coming into town to spend. The cars that are in town have largely been people who are working in town. People who are wanting to shop in town, some of them went home because they couldn't get parked. We have to do something, in my opinion, and there isn't another option on the table. We talked about parking. This came out of that conversation. If we want to do something, we need to do it quickly, and this is the only show in town. So that's why, on balance, I will be supporting the option that's in front of us today and encourage you to do the same, bearing in mind, as the Mayor said, that it is cost neutral this year, but it wouldn't be next year. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Mr Mayor, just as a point of process, is that an amendment to your recommendation, and will that need a seconder? And
No, I was happy for it to be added.
okay, thank you.
So, Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Sasha, for putting together this report with quite a few different options in there. I'm a bit unsure about the voucher system at the moment, and I think part of that is around the fraud questions that have been asked. And I know that there are certain measures that you can put in place to alleviate some of that, but a lot of the comments that were coming through was around having it in your terms and conditions. And I don't think that's entirely foolproof, because there are situations where you have, for example, if we make it just for our residents only and someone from Horowhenua uses it, how do you actually figure out how that even, it doesn't feel like there's a way to stop that, prevent that. You can say it's for residents, but how do you actually ensure that it actually does go to just residents? I'm not entirely convinced on that one. Also around things like the letterboxes, if we ended up putting them in people's letterboxes, or if it goes out with the Palmy Proud, the whole thing around, quite a lot of residents have no junk mail signs on their letterboxes, so they might not end up getting it. So I feel like there's a lot more questions there that we haven't really managed to answer as well as we possibly could have. Having said that, I think that the concept of supporting local is really, really good. And I really like the idea of option F, or the Mayor's, I guess, third motion. So a card that is council owned, and helps to showcase all the different services we offer in the city, because that could be available to all residents. And we could also use the data from that to actually start figuring out some things. For example, when we had the whole situation with the Lido and giving people free swimming, if that was incorporated into some kind of card that, that people use to get that free swimming, then we would have the data on how many residents are actually using that, as opposed to one resident who goes every day, So I think we'd get a lot more data that way if we had a card for each resident that helps to incorporate some of this supporting business in that kind of way. It also would give us time to investigate initiatives like volunteer rewards, because we've got a huge amount of people out there at the moment who are doing a whole lot of work for the city. And if we had a kind of system where we said, hey, you know, this month is volunteer month, so we're going to support volunteers, you will get free swimming at the Lido or whatever it is, I think it builds on more ability to do things like that for council. And it would help to support the thousands of people who, you know, volunteered for our city, not only during the crisis, but for the whole period. So I guess what I'm saying is it would be really good if we could join the business community with the community, like the nonprofit sector and city council and our residents all in the one. And I'm not sure just a voucher scheme would do that, but I would fully support something like a further investigation into a wider council card that could tick more than just kickstart economy boxes. And so, yeah, so I would be really supportive of that kind of concept, because I don't think we're quite ready to roll out a voucher system just yet. I'm not sure on that one. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, and certainly find this an interesting moment as one of the first and probably most vocal proponents of exploring this opportunity at the outset. Some of you got a rather long email from me explaining all the reasons why this was the bee's knees. So first, I want to thank the mayor and staff for getting behind exploring this, because I think it was really absolutely the right thing to do at the time, to explore and see, could this work? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And it's certainly been a discussion starter, sparked off discussions on social media like few things in recent times. So if nothing else, it's been good for engaging the community with council in that regard. I saw lots of feedback online, including feedback from business owners, and the only way I could summarize that feedback in brief would be to say that it was quite mixed indeed. Obviously, supporting local does have huge merit, and I think despite the technical issues that we've heard around the sort of voucher scheme this morning, we should be looking in the longer term around some substantive initiatives around supporting local. And I think the second motion from the mayor probably opens the door on that. In terms of the vouchers specifically, I'm reasonably conscious of where we're actually at, and it was only a week ago that we did a big excavation of the budget. And then we handed the scalpel to the chief executive and asked her for another $500,000. So I think it would be very prudent of us as council to be very careful about how we go about bringing money back into a budget, regardless of which side of the financial year it falls on. As we've heard from staff again, money doesn't just disappear at the end of the year. There is actually a connection between years and between debt repayment, et cetera, with those funds. So as always, exercising due diligence over it is our first role as councillors. So I do think, there could well have been, and I reflect back in that initial workshop discussion, there could well have been some very real scenarios where this would have been needed. If retail had fallen off a cliff and stayed at the bottom of that cliff, absolutely, we would want to do this. But it has bounced back substantially, already back to 95%. And while, yes, we might like it to be even further above that, I've been pleasantly surprised and encouraged to see how quickly and how strongly that has bounced back. So I don't think we're actually in that scenario where we need this at this point. I'll have to say as well, the proposed amendment to then hand the $10 back to the ratepayer is, I find quite amazing. It's the very definition of bureaucracy to take $10 out of a pocket run it through a big administrative system, and then put $10 back into the pocket. It doesn't help. I'm sorry. I get the intent to provide options there, but it's just needless bureaucracy in practice. So unfortunately, that hasn't helped, and I do remain in a position of not supporting advancing the voucher option at this point. I do think keeping it in the back pocket, as it were, for future reference is good, and absolutely support the intent and look forward to seeing what might happen around the buy local card. I think that's a great opportunity and one that we should all be right behind. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this, but I will be moving an amendment that we strike out the final bullet point, redeemed for face value against rates. Councillor Dennison's indicated that he will second that amendment. Just speaking to that point specifically, it goes against what we're trying to achieve to stimulate the local economy by then just giving people a discount on their rates. I'm supporting this because it is a initiative via delivering it via Palmy Proud means it's an initiative for our residents, for our local community. If we are just trying to give ratepayers a discount, then we should look at other avenues to do that. I think one of the reasons that I really love this proposal is this is not targeting people who already are going to go out and spend $30, $40, $50, $100 at a shop, at a cafe, wherever. This is going to target people who may have been putting off a new set of winter pajamas, may not often go and get, extra treats from Munchkins, may not go out and have brunch with a friend. It's going to target those people and give them a little bit of encouragement to go and do that because there's an incentive there. This is good for many people, not just the people who are going to be receiving a voucher, but it's good for local businesses to have additional in their door. It could be a reason for people to get in there. And I think it's also good for the council to be responding at many different levels. We've seen our recovery plan, which is really quite comprehensive, and this adds another layer to that in terms of us responding on a local level. There will always be a handful of people who abuse the system, whatever you do. But why would we penalise the majority from receiving a benefit just because we're worried about a couple of people? I think the risk is very small and most certainly can be managed. Likewise, we could brainstorm lots of alternative ideas to this or other ideas forever, but we're never going to get around to actually doing something. So I think this is really low risk. It can be done within this year's budgets already. And there's huge benefits to the local economy to have a city council encouraging spending at this level. The extra layer of admin that would be required if we did go down the inclusion of rates, I just think is unnecessary and not something that we should be looking at this time.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Harper first, but I'll come back to you.
No, I'm not speaking to the amendment. Sorry. I'm going to support the original motion that the Mayor put up without the amendment. I'm just going to say, as a retailer in the CBD, that what I like about this is that you can opt out. I mean, that's the whole point of this. You can be in or you don't have to be in. And I think as a retailer, that's probably the most important point for me. We did lose 6 weeks of trading. No matter what anybody says, it might be really good now, but we did lose 6 weeks. So there's 6 weeks, there's a big hole in your pocket, and it's really hard as a retailer. Each retailer does have a registration of who comes in and out of your shop, so you do know where everybody comes from. So we do know, and we have got a trace of where everybody's coming from, so we do know that right now, and we will know that for the coming weeks because that's what the government's telling us to do. So that's quite good. So we've got that tracking system in place, so we do know if they're outside the region. And the last thing I just want to say is I think this is a good system for our retailers in the region. And as retailers, we can do it or don't have to do it. It's entirely up to them. It's a good system.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not be supporting the voucher system, and I'd just like to comment on this whole process because I'm certainly not happy with it. I didn't get this report yesterday. I asked for it at 3 o'clock and there was no report. It hadn't come through. Still wasn't in my inbox at 6 o'clock, and I was busy last night and I didn't read the report. And I was busy this morning and I've skim read the report. So I think that is not very good process at all. And to be making $300,000 decisions around skim reading reports is not good. But I've skim read it enough to know what I'm going to say. But there is legal liability for this proposal, whether you like it or not. And at this stage, nobody can tell me that if retailers present $450,000 worth of vouchers to the council, we will be liable. And make no mistake about it, if the retailers have taken these vouchers in good faith, we will be liable to have to pay out. So there's nothing here to cap or give me good answers around the legal liability. There's no data that says if we put $300,000 into this system that businesses will end up with $2 to $4 million worth of good from it. The Milson butcher was mentioned. I live in Milson, so next week when I buy my meat, I'll just use my $10 voucher. So that $10 I was going to spend anyway. So there's no data to say that if we put this in that we're going to get X amount of dollars. And I commented before about the ratio. This is not about one business. This is about several hundred or a couple of hundred businesses. So why don't we just give those 200 businesses $1,000 each? Then we know it's been spread fairly. Because you don't know which businesses are going to get the return, or, are we favouring? So there's that to consider. The other thing is the tracking. I think that's irrelevant because when you're looking at fraud, once the retailers have accepted the money, and I go back to our liability again, and I don't think that's been covered. My final point is around 300K. Prior to today, I didn't know we had a spare 300K. So if I had $300,000, I think I might want to go out to my ratepayers or businesses and consult them and say, we've got $300,000 spare. How can we spend this money in the best possible way other than a $10 voucher? And I think there are far better ways that we could spend $300,000 to get the return that we're looking for. And this certainly will not be stimulating the business that I think. And as for adding the last amendment and for face value against rates, this package was to stimulate businesses, not for individual ratepayers. So I can't see the value in that. So I will not be supporting this.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Speaking to the amendment and reserving my view on the substantive. Again, last point Councillor Beattie made is the point why I won't support being redeemed for a saving on rates. The principle of the idea when we looked at recovery around stimulating the spend in our CBD or in the business sector was actually creating a voucher where you could leverage the amount of spend. So it's a $300,000 project that potentially could have another 2 times the effect on the spend over a course of a month, which would be helpful for a number of businesses, the small, medium enterprise businesses, not the supermarkets and the big chains. And so I initially had appeal for that type of concept and saw some merit in it. So the idea of offering just a straight out $10 saving on rates is pretty minor effect to create such a big scheme if that's the objective we're wanting to create. We can do that with the rate increase for next term, which next year, which we've done. We've tried to minimise that impact, and that's the place where we try and offset the rates saving, in my mind, politically. Rather than speaking, so that's the argument. It's around the whole principle of leverage and spend for businesses in our city. That's why I'm opposed to the amendment that Councillor Rutherford's name's against. Overall, I'm reserving my view on this. I've initially had some appeal for idea of having an investment into our local economy in this way, but the risks of doing this and the mixed feedback from the public has really retrenched my view of support for it. I think there is risk of it being duplicated or misused, or being dominated by a few that go around and pick up the vouchers out of the booklet around the community, and accept that. But the real benefit is you can only redeem it if they actually make a spend of twice as much as the value of the voucher. So it's not like they can just go make complete savings and only use one voucher at a time, I'd imagine. And so therefore I don't see the risk quite as extreme, and therefore I don't know if the benefit's going to be fully utilised, and how much of this is for us to feel good over a business making a $20 extra cash investment over the course of a month. And so for those reasons, I'm really leaning in opposition for the overall recommendation, but I'm going to support the amendment. Thank you.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make fulsome comments on both. That seems to be what's been taken at the moment. Just join the chorus in thanking the CE and your staff for preparing the paper at rather short notice. Very much appreciated. The purpose, as I understand it, is, as other members have said, to stimulate local spending in the local economy for small and medium enterprises and businesses. And for that reason, I will be supporting what's on the screen. Councillor Harbiter has indicated a really important aspect to that, and that's an opportunity for local businesses not to be bound by this, but to opt out if they choose to. I think there is an opportunity, and this will follow through with the longer term campaigns around Choose Local, Choose Manawatu. And when we get to that, I'll indicate my support at this stage as well. One of the concerns that I had initially was the scope in terms of the geographical scope with which this proposal would apply. And tentative conversations, as I understand it, were around that it would simply apply or relate to the CBD. What's proposed now is much broader than that, and that has been a welcome move, I would suggest, because it's certainly clear to all of us, I think, that the ring road simply doesn't define the level of hurt that small businesses are feeling in the current climate. It's time-bound, so it is in essence less than 1 month. So we're not talking about something that will have a longevity arrangement. As soon as the vouchers are out, there will be a distinct short period of time within which they must be redeemed. And as Councillor Dennison has referred to, there is a threshold by which the voucher could be redeemed. So I think, yes, that would limit the ability for all people to perhaps redeem them, but it does generate some a level, whether it's additional level or not, it is a level of spending within the local economy that I think would be quite helpful at the time. I would hope that the online options that Councillor Rutherford has referred to could some way be picked up as part of this as well. It is a local opportunity as well, so I'd certainly leave that with the CE to look at, alongside those terms and conditions. And I know that a number of them have been floated around, whether it's one voucher per transaction and the like. I accept that there is some risk around this. The issues that Councillors Beattie and Meehan have identified are real in my assessment, but I would hope that when the CE is, if this is implemented, signing off on those terms and conditions, there would be some way to try and mitigate that risk while accepting that the risk still exists nonetheless. I don't support the, well, I support the amendment. I don't support the final bullet point for two reasons, really. One is, as has been indicated, what is the purpose of what's been proposed? And it is to stimulate the local economy. It is not, in essence, to reward the council with its own money that it's taking from its own ratepayers. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if we were to allow this to be redeemed for some, well, $10 towards rates, we're penalising those that have already paid their rates within this current period, because we're talking about the current financial year, not what is to come. So I don't support, in that sense, I will support the amendment. And in a modified form, I will support the substantive motion.
Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Mayor, I do have a question related to the amendment before I speak to it, if that's okay, because it has been added after we had questions. I did ask the question during the question time about whether it would be possible for a voucher to be used towards rates, and I think the answer was that the officer was unsure. And so I guess it would be good to have an understanding of, if that were to be included, whether that would be practical, and also how that would work with people who have direct debits established, or what the administration would be around that, or whether there'd be any additional, just to get an understanding of whether that's even possible, and what the implications of us including that would be.
I suspect that's quite tricky to answer, but the CFO will give an attempt.
It probably is a little bit tricky to answer because it's been thrust on us all of a sudden, but I suspect the volume will be so great that it will add significantly to the administration costs. It's quite difficult for us, particularly if people are on direct debits, because it's quite a big process to change those direct debits. And because most of this year's rates have been cleared, as Deputy Mayor said, it makes it administratively even more difficult. So that, for me, is a difficult administrative process, and probably, well, not super expensive, definitely adds to the costs.
Thank you. I don't need to comment on the amendment. I'll wait till the amendment's gone through and comment on the substantive motion.
I'm taking both. We've taken both now.
So isn't standing orders to address the amendment prior?
Yeah, yes, we are. We're doing that.
So my view of the substantive motion may be influenced by the way the amendment goes.
Okay. Okay. All right. We'll go through it again. That's fine. Okay. So are there any more? Oh, sorry, Councillor Finlay.
Mr. Mayor, I will not support this for several reasons. The fraud thing has been talked through and made it very clear, and I can see how some people would do it quite substantially. One of the things that worries me more than anything else, it's good for the retailers, but it's so many of our residents would miss out on being able to access this. It's not clear whether it's going to be in the Palmy Proud, and if it's in Palmy Proud, how many people actually do get hold of a Palmy Proud? We're going to deliver it through the letterboxes. How many people don't get the Guardian? So I don't think it's going to be a fair way of putting it out. I don't think it would work, but I do like the idea of a Palmy card. Years ago in Palmerston North, we had a low-income subcommittee, and with the low-income subcommittee card, it went out there. And it was very popular in town. It was used for the Lido, it was used for the library, several businesses gave discounts, etc. That would be a much better way of doing it, a long-term thing, and ways that we could have a look at things like the Lido. How many local people are using the Lido? How many local people use the Esplanade Railway, etc., etc.? The Palmy card, I will support 100%, so I think it's a brilliant idea. But this $10 giveaway, maybe, I won't, I'm sorry.
All right, councillors, everyone has commented that wished to comment. So are you okay, councillor, if we do this by division? I think it's the easiest way to do it. So we vote on the amendment, which is to delete redeemed for face value against rates. And that's been moved by Councillor Rutherford, second by Councillor Dennison. So do you want to, oh, no, you can't, you don't have a right of reply, sorry. So we'll now vote on this.
Okay. Mayor Smith?
4.
4. Councillor Harpeter? Abstain. Councillor Meehan? Against. Councillor Beattie? 4. Councillor Dingwall?
Against.
Against. Councillor Dennison?
4.
4. Councillor Naylor?
So for removing it, that's correct, yeah, 4.
4. Oh, okay, we're confused.
We are voting to strike it out. So if you say 4, you are striking it out.
Okay, so Councillor Meehan would like to vote for. Councillor Naylor, what would you like
Me
to
too,
vote?
please, sorry.
Okay, maybe I'll begin again. Okay, so we,
Start again.
okay, so the table, at the moment, we're voting on the amendment. The amendment is specifically to remove the words redeemed for face value against rates from the motion that was on the table. So if you're voting for, you are voting to remove that statement. Okay, Mayor Smith?
4.
4. Councillor Harpeter?
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Meehan? 4. Councillor Beattie? 4. Councillor Dingwall?
4.
4. Councillor Dennison?
4.
4. Councillor Naylor?
4.
4. Councillor Rutherford?
4.
4. Councillor Petrinas? 4. Councillor Butt? 4. Councillor Barrett?
4.
4. Councillor Johnson?
4.
4. Councillor Finlay?
4.
4. Councillor Bowen? Against? Councillor Hancock?
4.
4. Deputy Mayor Tukiri?
4.
4.
The amendment has succeeded, 14 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention. Right, we will come now to the substantive, which is, we'll just need to remove that last one, please. Right, there were 1 or 2 of you that wished to comment again on this. So, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I applaud us coming up with creative and innovative ideas at this time, and I think this idea certainly was one of those, and I appreciate the work that's gone in by officers. As we look into the implications of it and unpack it, I think we need to realise when it's perhaps not one that would be wise to proceed with. And I think I won't be supporting this today. I was certainly sympathetic of exploring that option of it being able to be included as a reduction on someone's rates, because one of the reasons I'm really not in favour of it is that I think there's 2 sides to this coin. There's the benefit that it may have been to businesses, but it's also how it's paid for, which is clearly from the ratepayer, whether it's in this financial year or next financial year. That $300,000 or $350,000 still does have to be paid for by the ratepayers. And in fact, the fact that there is, the message from the CEO was that we could accommodate it within our budget. The message from the CFO was that it's still going to be tight. Irrelevant of which way you look at it, it will come off the bottom line. If we do have a surplus, that is of benefit to years going, the coming years, in terms of our debt. And so at the end of the day, it all comes out of ratepayers' pockets. Whether we wanted to return that to them to spend, I guess, is what's up for debate. And my concern is that it actually disadvantages those who are actually in more limited means at the moment from being able to spend it, but they're still having to pay for it. So the other, I guess, reason that I have decided that I won't be supporting this is really the risk that seems to be evident. And it, despite, I mean, the number of answers to questions this morning, it's still a little bit uncertain whether that risk actually sits with the business owners who may potentially have a fraudulent voucher presented to them, or whether that risk actually sits with the council, who, whether or not they have to then pay that business or not. For that, it seemed a little bit unclear if those terms and conditions weren't followed through on. So I think it is problematic. Yes, perhaps a good idea to explore, but one which I think it would be unwise to proceed with.
All right, councillors, anybody else that wishes to comment again? Okay, all right, well, I'm going to have a right to reply. Look, councillors, this is all about leveraging, stimulating spend and supporting businesses or not. Simple as that. We're going to get criticised whatever we do, from extreme left to extreme right, and I've heard comments around watching Facebook and stuff comments, and sorry, Jono, some of those people don't even put their name to things, and they are keyboard warriors, so I certainly wouldn't be taking my pendulum swing off that. It's all about stimulating jobs. That's what it's all really about. It's about the mums and dads, the families that are out there. And many of them are SMEs. I'm really optimistic that Palmerston North will get through this. And at a bigger business level, the diverse sectors and everything, I think we are generally in pretty good shape. But it's the SMEs, it's the people on the ground, it's our shop window, which I'm really worried about. And we've heard comments that things are okay, it's going well. Well, I think we need to scratch below the veneer a little bit. I'm very much a glass half full, or in some cases totally full at times. And I'm optimistic that we can do things. Can we stimulate things? Yes. It isn't just about residents. I mean, 90% of this will go to residents. If we get visitors coming here, what's wrong with that? They're still spending. And the residents card is a separate thing, which we'll come to in a moment. It's not about volunteers, but again, that could be put into the residents card. And it needs to be done with some urgency, people. I really do stress to you, we can't be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when all the closed signs are up. It's not a lot of risk, really. It's not a lot of risk at all. And it's got a multiplier effect to it. So if we spend $1, we're likely to get 3 back. So please, I do want you to support it. There's been claims around fraud and our legal liability. I do believe they can be mitigated. In my former life, I've been involved in a lot of these types of systems and schemes, and the devil is in the detail. So I think we've got to trust our officers and what they're doing there. So in my closing statement, I mean, as I said at the start, this is around supporting businesses, their employees, their families, or simply not. So I'll just leave it at that. So we will look to substantive motion, and then we'll come to number 3 thereafter.
Councillor Petrinas. Against. Councillor Bowen. For. Councillor Butt. Against. Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Against. Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Against. Councillor Hapeta. Abstain. Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Against. Deputy Mayor Utikere.
For.
Councillor Dennison.
For.
Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Against. Councillor Rutherford.
For.
Councillor Meehan. Against. Councillor Beattie. Against. Mayor Smith.
For.
Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Against. Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Against.
So the substantive motion is lost with 5 for, 10 against with 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, we'll move to number 3. around that a future Choose Manawatu Palmy Proud residence card is explored over time within existing council budgets and reported back in the near future. I've left that quite open. There's a bit of work to be done there, but it did seem to have some merit. I'll ask for a seconder. Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Some time ago, some of the newer councillors probably won't be aware of it, but there was a residence card. It was quite successful. It was run by Destination Manawatu, and unfortunately, one of the first acts of CEDA was to get rid of it. That was probably a wrong move. But look, we've got a vehicle with Palmy Proud. We've got another vehicle with Choose Manawatu, which is wider. So let's let the officers have a look at this. They're doing some good work around the whole Palmy Proud brand, and I think this has got some real merits. And as Councillor Finlay said earlier, it can have businesses in it, but it could also have some of our council facilities as well. It could even go as far as Councillor Dingwall said around volunteers. So there's quite a lot of scope here. Let's not try and ring fence the officers too much, so it's quite generic, but I still think it needs to come back to us at a later date. So I'd ask for your support on this, please. Are there any comments to this? Okay. All right. Okay, well, we'll put this to the vote. Division again, sorry, I'm just unsure where we're going with some of the stuff, so to you.
Sure. Councillor Petrinas. 4. Councillor Dennison. 4. Mayor Smith.
4.
4. Councillor Johnson.
4.
4. Councillor Hancock.
4.
4. Councillor Hawhita. Councillor Barrett.
4.
4. Councillor Rutherford.
4.
4. Deputy Mayor Tukere.
4.
4. Councillor Bowen. 4. Councillor Finlay.
4.
4. Councillor Butt. 4. Councillor Naylor.
4.
4. Councillor Dingwall.
4.
4. Councillor Meehan. 4. Councillor Beattie. 4. Oh, can't count, sorry. Try that.
That is passed 15 votes for with 1 abstention. Thank you. All right, thank you, councillors. We got through that. We now go to number 8 on our order paper, which is a electoral system review. There's a report there on page 29 from our governance manager, Hannah, and I'll pass to you, Hannah.
I'm happy to take this as read, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, it has been taken as read. I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. Just in regards to the proposed committee dates, I just wondered if there had been any consideration.
Hang on, with electoral system.
This is number
sorry,
page
I've
29.
jumped ahead. My apologies.
Okay. All right, is there any questions of the office around page 29? It is the electoral system review. And it's around our STV voting. Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Query, I was just interested to know what research was done following the last election in 2019 as to why 62% of voters did not vote using STV.
So, Councillor, I think your question is a little bit of a loaded one. The voting participation rate, yes, as you stated, the negative of what it was, 37.32% voted. We don't know whether they didn't vote because of the electoral system. We haven't done research on that particular question.
Well, Mr. Mayor,
all through the election, and every comment that I've heard from ratepayers is they were opposed to STV and wanted to go back to first past the post. So I think it's quite important that we look at one of the other options for going back to the community to find out what they really want. Well, can I move recommendation option 3, Mr. Mayor?
Is there a seconder for that?
Yeah.
Councillor Meehan. Could I, just before I go to Councillor Bowen, can I ask Hannah, we had the little electoral system advantages here, and we're clearly the last in the pack by some margin, I must say. And you've done your advantages here, and I know this is really subjective, but you've said here voter turnout question mark, yet first past the post has quite a clear favour for getting more of the. Was that just because it was too hard, or?
Okay, so if you have a look on table 1, Dunedin also for their at-large electorates do have STV, and their voter turnout is 45.6%. So there's no direct correlation necessarily between the voting system that's used and the turnout.
But just about everybody that's first past the post is in their 50s.
Yeah.
Yes.
My question is, it's quite subjective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. May. It was a question, a very generic question, actually, please. The report to Council in June, following the decision today, will that report include the question raised last month at Council about the number of elected members for PNCC?
Yes, so the first part of that's required each traineum is to have a look at the electoral system. That's the first step, and then every 2 traineums, it's expected that we would do a representation review. So it wouldn't be necessary to do a representation review this traineum, but from the conversations we had at the previous meeting, the suggestion was that we would look at the electoral system first, and then the next step would be to consider whether the council wanted to take a representation review. And the representation review does look at whether we have wards or whether we have an at-large system, how many councillors we have, whether we have community boards. So those are the 3 items that we look at within a representation review. The electoral system is separate to that.
Thank you.
Right. Are there any other Councillor Finlay?
Just a question. In the list that you've given us with the electoral system, most of the FFPs are way ahead of the STVs. But in table 2, you gave us the voter turnout, but you didn't give us the same cities. Is there any reason for that?
And it was the data that's available to me. So the electoral system for the Metro Councils are what is listed in table 1, except for Auckland. And then, yeah, it's just the definitions and the data that's available, Councillor. There was no other intention.
Well, further that, do we know in table 2 which one of these are FFP and which are STV?
Yep. So
that would have been helpful.
Yeah, so generally when we are comparing the territorial authorities, we tend to take Auckland out of the mix because of the separate rules around how Auckland operates. So Christchurch is FPP. Dunedin has a mix of systems. So in their at-large system, they use STV. Hamilton, sorry, I haven't got directly in front of me at the moment. Hutt City uses FPP. Nelson uses FPP. We use STV. Porirua, sorry, I would also have to come back to you. And then we have Tauranga, who have moved to STV recently. Upper Hutt also use STV, and Wellington has recently moved to STV.
Upper Hutt's first past the post.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Upper Hutt versus Hutt City, sorry.
It's quite obvious, isn't it? Thank you.
Could I just ask a question, Hannah? If we were to go to an option 3 where we ask the community, can we not roll in the representational review, or is that our decision, or is that sort of a legislative decision? It'd be nice to be able to do the whole thing at once rather than continually going out all the time.
There are a lot more requirements around a representation review and the dates by which things would have to happen and the dates before which things cannot happen. So with a representation review, we can't actually formally start that until the 1st of March next year. So that could potentially, depending on when we took it, could affect whether it would roll into place for we might have to skip a training before it actually went in place if we waited. Because the poll has to be taken before the end of February.
Why?
It's what the legislation requirements set out for us.
I just feel like we're going out twice on some things, and I think we could roll this all together, which I sense that's what probably councillors probably want to do at some stage, certainly around the representational side anyway. Councillor Dennison and Councillor Rutherford.
Just wondered, we have gone out with the poll being enacted on the voting system previously, and I'm not sure if you've got the information on hand, but I believe it was fairly close either way as far as public
My
view.
understanding, Councillor, is, sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, is that the last time a poll was taken was 2003.
Oh, wow.
So even if it was close, it was a long time ago to be able to compare the data.
I remember.
All right, Councillor Rutherford, and if Sarah, we've got Councillor Meehan seconded that.
Just wondering if we had to go out and do a poll or whatever that process looked like, what would that cost?
I haven't done the work around that yet. We would tend towards using our external contracting system for doing that. So I would have to go out and tender that process and go through the normal process for that. I haven't looked at that yet. In preparing the report, I expected that the first step would be to consult, and that if you felt that through that consultation that there was a voice asking for a poll, that you would then go to poll rather than to jump to poll from the beginning. The reason I was working on that assumption is that the electors, the residents themselves, always have the right to go to poll regardless. You as a council don't have to call a poll, 5% of them can. So even if you consulted and then made a decision to keep it and people didn't like it, they could also call a poll. So my thinking was we would do it in steps rather than jump, which is, sorry, I haven't prepared that yet.
Okay. Do you have any idea whether it would be more than 100,000, less than 100,000, more than 50,000? Like, are we talking about, because it's obviously going to be an unbudgeted expense, and so.
Sure. If we looked at similar costs for running the election, for example, the work we've been doing on the bid, I would imagine somewhere around $15,000.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Hannah, can you just explain in a bit more detail the difference between correlation and causation, please?
I'm not sure, Councillor, that I need to do that for those people that are at the table. There is certainly a correlation. There's certainly a correlation in the data, but the reason I put question marks is I do not believe that it's a causation. That's why I put question marks in my table. But it is a subjective statement.
I think, judging from the statements of some of the elected members, I think it's very important that you do explain that, because just because two things increase or decrease at the same time doesn't mean that they're linked. And I think it's very important that elected members understand that to make an informed decision.
Yeah, I think you've given some context to that just now, but to maybe widen the conversation a little bit, the Electoral Act itself allows for either system to be used. And the reason it does that is because both systems have advantages and both systems have disadvantages. and that is why it allows us to choose.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. If we, go for this motion and say yes, if the general public say yes, we want to change the system, will it be a binding on the council?
No, I don't think it is it?
So the result of the poll would be binding for the following 2 elections.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just clarify before I go to Councillor Beattie, that we're jumping straight to a community poll? I thought we were going to ask whether we...
So in the report, there are several options, but the motion that's come from the floor was to take the third option.
Could I just check with the mover and the seconder whether that's exactly, because there is a little bit of confusion about that. Is that what you're after, Councillor?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. When I looked at option 2, and we were talking about consultation being undertaken in July 2020, I look at the situation and think it's not a very good time to be asking the community at this stage as to what they might want for STV versus first past the post. And that's why I looked at option 3 then for the poll to be done by February 2021. It gives more time to get away from all the issues and problems that everybody's got.
Okay. Yeah,
so we're just trying to clarify something around costs, and I guess just for that was a good point of clarification, because if it is similar to the Māori ward poll that we ran, that cost, we think, and I can't guarantee it, but around 100,000.
No, that's the democracy, that's true.
So there's 2 different things there. We were talking before about asking the question about, do we go to a poll? That's quite different and that's a lot cheaper. But if you're going to go to a full poll, you've got to go through the whole process of sending out forms and everything else. Okay, Councillor Beattie.
Councillor Beattie, can you please turn on your microphone?
That was one of my questions. I think you all heard that. Just a clarification on table 2. In 2010, we did a poll and we went from wards to first past the post. And we did a big poll then.
Wards to citywide.
To citywide, sorry. So when you look at those stats, I mean, you've got to take that into consideration too, because in a lot of these statistics there's no constant. So I just think you just need to have a really good think about, especially when we did change. And I think that was the poll that was very, very close, because I know in the Papiaoa ward it was like 50.4%. So, and it was pretty much like that right across the city.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, do you have a question, Councillor Maiden? Or was that?
I was just saying, had you taken that into consideration?
Yes, I have. So that's why I haven't made a judgment call as to whether there's one factor that's causing something, because there are a variety of things that are happening here. There's no one city that we can compare ourselves against and say we operate in a very similar way to this particular similar size metro with similar at large and no, So all I can say is that the research itself and certainly the Local Government Commission documentation on this point make it clear that in an at-large system, that STV is expected to give fairer results. So they do define the differences of what STV would look like in an at-large system rather than an award system. So certainly that is a factor that is involved there.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, sorry, just a very brief question. Do we know if we get more diversity through STV versus FPP?
Yes, we absolutely do. So STV is thought in all the research to provide more diversity. As
Thank
long,
you.
with a caveat on that, as long as there are, exactly, diverse candidates. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Finlay?
Yeah, thank you. Just as a matter of thought, it came out. The last poll we had was a citizens initiated poll with Peter Wheeler and his group who forced that one. So that always can happen. 4,000 members citizens can come along and demand one, and the last one was one like that. And also the one back in 2003 was a citizens
There's a question,
initiated
is
poll.
it, Councillor?
Sorry?
There's a question to...
Yes, it's coming. It's coming. Just get the background to it first. So if we decide not to go ahead with this poll, we could have a citizens group come along with 4,000 signatures and demand it, and that would be
Yes.
binding on us as well, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So
Thank you.
which is why we have the July, September, February requirements on us. In September, we must go out and publicly notify everyone that they can demand a poll, regardless of today's decision.
Councillor Dingwell and then Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, I didn't have a comment.
Okay.
Question.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one question. The table 3 on page 34 has got the obvious advantages listed there under STV. The bottom one has also been marked as cost, and I'm just wondering, just for clarity, I'm assuming that there's no difference in the cost of, is that just related to that it would be more expensive to go out and consult as not consult? Okay, that's
Yes,
good.
my apologies, that's not very clear. in the
Mr
table.
Mayor, I'd
That's
just
exactly
like
what I mean.
to give notice that if this motion fails, that I'd be very happy to move option 1.
Yep, there's be a few that lining up to second it, so that's fine. All right. Okay, we have the motion on the floor. Councillor Petrina, I open up for any comments. There's been a bit of comment sneaked into questions, but that's fine. We're all friends here. I'll now go to Councillor Petrinas. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'll speak to the motion because over the last 3 years, I've had so many comments given to me by ratepayers and members of Palmerston North that we should have had the first past the post system rather than the STV. The actual concerns of being able to rank people and understand how they should do the ranking has put a lot of people off. And I'm looking at giving the community an option to sort of say to this council, listen, we need to go back to first past the post.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting this. I will support the notice of motion. Looking at table 2 on page 34, I accept that perhaps if you're looking at those stats, the last election was a little bit of a misnomer in terms of comparisons, but up until that point, things were fairly on par with other metro sector councils there in terms of turnout. I guess I accept, perhaps others do too, the officer's rationale or reason in the report at paragraph 4.2 around why that might be the case. And for example, one could argue that voter turnout in the city is low because of the stability of its council. So that might be one particular reason that I'd like to perhaps favour more than others. But look, STV from a principled approach is a fairer option. It is an option that delivers on representation and delivers on diversity. And all one needs to do is actually look around this council table and see that that's diversity in action to some extent. So any suggestion that it is an unfamiliar process for electors, I think is an indication that some of our electors are not perhaps as smart as we'd like to think. So people do know how to use STV. When we look at actually the return in terms of the validity of votes that are cast, the actual invalidity
rate or ratio is much lower than one might suggest. So to suggest that our electors are dumb because they don't, or to infer, I infer, that they're dumb because they can't understand the system actually doesn't necessarily fly with me. It is something that is familiar. I think we should continue with it. There is a default option to any electors to engage with if they're not comfortable with that. The cost of $100,000 for a poll is not something at this stage, for this reason, that sits comfortably. So I won't be supporting this, but I will be supporting the notice of motion.
Okay, councillors, in the interest of time, I'll do 3 for and 3 against. So, Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am voting against the motion on the screen, and I will be indicating my support for the notice of motion. If we look at the information supplied by officers, particularly at table 1, which was brought up through many comments, even those areas who are using first past the post, half of their voters are not voting. Let's not use a lack of satisfaction for local government across the country as a reason to flip between electoral systems every time this discussion comes up. We know that local government needs a review. We know that it needs a further investment, but that's not a reason for jumping back and forth between electoral systems. We know that STV, and when I say we know because of evidence that STV is a fairer system, it produces candidates or successful candidates that are more reflective of the community, and it provides for more diversity. And as the Deputy Mayor's already pointed out, look around this table and see the example of what STV has given us. I would agree that there are issues in terms of voting, and there are issues in terms of perhaps the candidates on offer. Maybe our community is not satisfied with who is standing to represent them, but that's not a reason to provide further confusion and jump between systems. I will be absolutely supporting STV and will not be supporting the motion on the screen.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Deputy Mayor was quite correct when he said that the people understand STV. In fact, at the last election, what was it? 39% of the population understood it. What about the rest? They didn't vote. So your statement that majority of people understand it, I think, doesn't have any evidence. As far as diversity goes, can anyone remember the last Maori MP in this City Council? Well, I can. I know the last 2 or 3. And they all got in under first past the post, not STV. So under STV, we have not been able to have one Maori councillor in this council. So maybe we should decide what's best for us. Now, I have a look around the room and I think everybody here got in on an STV vote. And turkeys don't vote for Christmas, remember. Why don't we? And what are we so scared of? That we won't go out to the community of Palmerston North, as the Deputy Mayor points out, who know what they're doing, and ask them what they want. Are we scared we might lose something? Is Christmas closer than we thought? I think we should go out to the community and let our community make a decision and not ourselves. Thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had elections under both formats, so I'm not a turkey voting for Christmas. In actual fact, the outcome of the last election, most recent election, would have had a very minor outcome of difference of people around the table. It would have been very similar off the information that was available. What STV does when we have a citywide election and members of the public can vote up to 15 ticks is give them a preference of who is their more preferred candidates over those 15 votes. In fact, can vote every single candidate with a preference. And so I think that is a differentiation that we want to make. We've got citywide elections, and I believe STV suits that style of indicating a preference. There is the cost. We've been trying to retrench costs back out and cut them back down another 500,000, and then on a voting system which has, in my view, some variables on why the outcome's so different, whether it's the issues of the day. The Deputy Mayor mentioned the stability of the council from the previous term, the diversity of candidates in the very next point, and the promotion of the elections itself. And I think it was actually a weakness of the previous election here locally in the city that we didn't actually have support for candidate meetings actively. And so there are a range of variables. The outcome of the vote, I think, will be neither here nor there. It's the outcome of the candidates, the issues of the day. I'm avoiding the cost, and I believe last time the outcome of the election would have been so minor, the difference of candidates being elected, the purpose of change is not necessary. I'm voting against going out to a poll for that reason, and I think the community largely is supportive of STV and the outcomes that it produces. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the motion of going out to the public. It's been some time since we've done it, and I think it's time to see what the public want to say. I think diversity around the table doesn't really weigh up as an argument for STV. I was on council my first time in 2010, and the diversity around the table wasn't a lot different. So I don't hold that argument. I see that the numbers on table 1 that we're given stack up in favour of FPP. So I think it's time to let the community have a say, and we've talked about money in surplus, so we use that to go out and find out what the public have to say. I think the timeline between the last time we done it and now, I think it's feasible that we do go out and ask public again rather than just sit back and wait and see. We've got our views, yes, but let's find out what the public have to say.
Okay, is anybody else in favour of the motion that wishes to speak? Okay, I'll now go back to give you a right of reply. Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been quite fascinating listening to the arguments that have been presented. I think Councillor Finlay is quite correct. You know, you don't want to sort of vote for Christmas if you're a turkey. But it is important that the community does have a say in what is happening, because one of the concerns that I have is when you go around the communities in the city is the degree of disaffection. The attitude is, oh, it's a waste of time talking to council because they'll do just whatever they want to do. Well, it's about time we then listen to the actual community. So I urge everybody to vote for this motion, and we'll see what result arrives.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Right, we're going to councillors. Sorry, in the interest of time, and I'll go to Hannah, please.
Okay, so the vote is on the motion for option 3. Councillor Bowen. Against. Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Against. Councillor Petrinas. For. Councillor Harpeta. Against. Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Against. Deputy Mayor Tukiri.
Against.
Against. Councillor Finlay.
For.
For. Mayor Smith.
Against.
Against. Councillor Johnson. Has left the meeting. Sorry, my apologies. Councillor Beattie. Against. Councillor Rutherford.
Against.
Against. Councillor Dennison.
Against.
Against. Councillor Meehan. For. Councillor Butt. Against. Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Against. Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Against.
All right, the motion put has lost 3 votes for, 12 against. So, Councillor Naylor, you put up option 1.
Yep. Do you want me to speak to that?
If you want to, yes. Have we got a seconder first? Councillor Barrett. And Are you happy to, in the interest of time again, move both? Yeah, cool. All right, floor is yours, councillor.
Thank you. I think that so we should always be interested in public views, and I'm almost certain that if we did consult or if we did go out for a poll, there would be strong arguments both ways, and we would hear strong arguments both ways for First Past the Post and for STV. I think the table 3 outlines the advantages of both systems, and I think there's no denying that if First Past the Post is actually easier, it's more straightforward. However, STV is, I believe, fairer. And so if we've got to choose between something that's fairer versus something that's easier, my preference is to go with what's fair and what will achieve more minority candidates. And I think that's really important. I think we need to look at the evidence, and there is evidence that supports that. We also, the familiarity is really also interesting, that voters under 40 are actually more familiar with STV now, and the voters over 40 are actually familiar with both. We've had STV around long enough that, yes, it is complex, but there are some really straightforward ways to explain that. Zolka, Councillor Butt shared a very good method to understand that on his Facebook at the last elections, and I stole that, and that was helpful to some people. I think there are ways that we can explain this for those who do find it difficult, and that's something that is there. Also, the other thing I think we need to think about is consistency. I know Horizons are still with First Past the Post, but we do have the DHB with STV as well, and at some point I think it would be really nice if the voting papers had the same system across the board, so perhaps we can appeal to Horizons when they make this decision. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Finlay.
A question from the Administrator. If this passes, there is nothing therefore after that stopping the community, if they get a petition up asking for a poll, the poll can still go ahead and be binding?
Correct.
So if we vote for this, it can be overturned by the poll. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen. Yep, Councillor Dennison.
Just a question also around, is it not true that one of the options could be that council determines that we go to First Past the Post? And that option actually hasn't been included in this report, but I just wanted to make the point that that is actually one of the options council does have.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I want to make that point because it's actually missing in the context of this report. It's a pretty important point, but I'm still supportive of the single transferable one.
Okay, Councillor Hapeta.
Just very quickly, as a comment, I get a lot of people saying to me, it's not STV that confuses them, it's having the 3 different voting systems on the one page. It's not STV, it's having Horizons, DHB and our one on the one page. And that is what's the confusion, particularly when Horizons is a different. And I know that that's what Councillor Naylor brought up, but I think that's the confusion on the one page. So I don't know whether we have to have that all on one page. So that is something that I just want to put up, that's not, STV is not the confusion. It is having the 3 different systems on the one sheet. So I don't know that in the future whether we can change that for next time round. But that's the confusion for a lot of people in different generations, not just older generations. I'm talking a lot of generations don't like that.
Okay, I'll go back to you, Councillor Naylor. Do you need a right to reply?
No, I'm happy, thanks.
Okay. All right, councillors, we'll do this by division again.
So we're looking at item 1 and 2. Councillor Bowen. 4. Councillor Dennison. 4. Councillor Meehan. Against, Councillor Petrinas. Against, Councillor Butt. 4. Councillor Johnson has removed herself from the meeting. Councillor Hancock.
4.
For Councillor Barrett.
For.
For Councillor Rutherford. For Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Against Councillor Dingwall.
For.
For Councillor Harpiter. For Deputy Mayor Tukiri. For Councillor Beattie. For Councillor Naylor. For Mayor Smith.
For.
For.
Okay, item 8 around the electoral system review has option 1 has passed, 12 votes for, 3 against. Councillors, now we're going to adjourn for lunch. I've ordered you some lunch, but it's back at the at the Missoula room, so you'll have to go and get that. Sorry, but we will re-adjourn in an hour's time at 1:35. Just like to acknowledge Mayor Holdham, Neil Holdham, who's the Mayor of New Plymouth, and welcome Neil. He's been interested in this little debate. So thank you, councillors, and I'll see you back here in an hour.